elite, corrupt, colonial, and criminally culpable from the moment the gentlemen in Paris in 1920 tipped their top hats until 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan. These men did nothing to stop the mass murder, the wars, the invasions, the massacres, Arab self-killing, the international campaign to target the Jews, to pauperize the Jews, ghettoize the Jews, transport them to death camps.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Hello, this is Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and human rights author of 325 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide, including IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and my latest scoop book, Israel Strikes Iran, as well as a bold new 15th anniversary edition of Nazi Nexus. Ours is a show for opinion makers and decision makers, not mass clicks. So subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, we need your assistance. Please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support and keep us independent. Today's episode is made possible and sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by Israel 365 and my bold new 15th anniversary edition of Nazi Nexus, available everywhere across the planet in 12 paperback, hardback, electronic, and audiobook editions. That said, remember, I only speak for myself, and the same goes for any of my guests. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, speaks frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a turbulent future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We'll get to our disruptive main topic, exploring the end of the UN, question mark maybe, in a few minutes. First, I want to don a special yarmulke given to me a few days ago by inspirational civil rights attorney Nathan Lewin, who has turned 90. It commemorates his struggle to allow religious Jews to wear a yarmulke in the U.S. military. He sued, fought the case to the Supreme Court, but lost on constitutional grounds. Yet, Justice William Bryen stated that the problem could be easily fixed by Congress. The legislation was indeed passed, and Justice Bryen was given a yarmulke, much like this one. Military. And Justice Bryen found that he was sometimes wearing it all day long. I am proud to have this. I will wear it and allow others I know to wear it. It is commemorated inside to Nathan Lewin. Next, to all the impudent and ill-informed people calling ICE agents Nazis and Gestapo. Let me shatter your ignorance and explain that Nazis and Gestapo routinely, almost daily, lined up people against a wall and shot them, made civilians stand all day naked in the freezing cold, purposely beat little children in front of their mothers, went from town to town hanging civilians from light posts and balconies until they ran out of rope. They brutally and intentionally murdered 6 million Jews, another 7 million of other identities and nationalities, plus some 300,000 disabled. The Gestapo were experts at torture, peeling skin off your body and rubbing salt on it, breaking bones, sexually assaulting girls and mothers in front of their families. If you have a grievance against ICE, don't express it by showing how profoundly ignorant you are of the words you choose and the human rights knowledge you lack. And now to our main topic. Are we witnessing the end of the UN? Better question, did we ever need the UN? International military alliances to keep the peace and destroy common enemies have existed throughout history. One of the most consequential was the early alliance that arose in the Middle East from various empires in the 7th century BC that combined to destroy the ancient Nineveh quadropolis that made up the world's first megacity, and that was the seat of the Nineveh Empire. Nineveh was across the river from where Mosul, Iraq is today. Nineveh was a terror state that plundered, enslaved, and impaled citizens of surrounding territories. The beheaded remnants hung from gardens as ornaments. In 612 BC, the Babylonians allied with the Persian Medes and Scythians to utterly destroy the evil Nineveh Empire, which remained a buried, treasured site for centuries until ISIS set up their murder operation just across the river in Mosul. History has been populated by many wars as the Caesars and Mongol chieftains and the kings and queens, sultans and czars of the world conquered for the sake of conquest, enslaved for the sake of enslavement, and plundered for the sake of plunder. Historians record at least 14,000 distinct wars, but many experts suggest the true number, especially when massacres are added in, might be 10 times higher. International law never existed, and even today does not exist as anything resembling what we consider to be legislated law, but international agreements among nations did. For many centuries, peace activists have been trying to outlaw war or regulate it. The first international intergovernmental organization of peace was created by a small coterie of parliamentarians in 1889. It was the Interparliamentary Union, and it still works and functions with 189 parliaments around the world, excluding the United States, and it still partners with the international legislative unions such as the Arab Parliament, the European Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, and the Latin American Parliament, as well as the Caribbean Parliament. The IPU's next meeting is in fact in New York in November 2026, but the IPU never did become more than an idea form. War was always hell until the turn of the 20th century, when the Industrial Revolution came to warfare and when it became possible to kill millions and kill them efficiently and swiftly and often within a matter of days. Machines could now kill in ways that men could never have dreamed. Now we see how arrogant imperial pride, sheer greed, and corporate profits from weapons came together to create a new dynamic of warfare. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to World War I. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, King George V of Great Britain, along with Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, Hungary, King Albert I of Belgium, and King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy. These were the guys. Many were descendants of one woman, Queen Victoria, who mothered 9 children, 42 grandchildren, and 87 great-grandchildren. The monarchs got into a riddle within a riddle pissing match. They teamed up with the Merchants of Death, meaning Krupp in Germany, F.N. Herstal in Belgium, Schneider Crusoe in France, Vickers and Armstrong Whitworth in Britain, and the big banks from Wall Street to London's Square Mile. And then, ladies and gentlemen, they finally did it. They made a world war, World War I. In the first weeks of the First Battle of the Marne, from September 6th to September 12th, 1914, we saw some 500,000 total casualties. About half of them were fatalities. When the guns fell silent at the end of World War I, 8 million were dead, 21 million were wounded, 2 million missing in action, $180 billion spent, and no one could say why. Let me repeat that. There is no statesman, historian, government official, or military expert who can tell us why we fought World War I. Ironically, I answered the question in my award-winning book, Banking on Baghdad. Why did they kill each other by the millions? They just wanted to. So to the victors went the spoils, and to the losers went the Versailles Treaty, which in Article 32 imposed a monumental war debt on Germany totaling $600 billion in today's money. Germany actually finished making the final payment just about 16 years ago in 2015. The idea of the League was invented by Democrat Woodrow Wilson, a lover of the KKK and keeping people in their place. He laid out the principles at the Paris Peace Conference, where everything was worked out nice and dandy. Ironically, the midterm elections saw a Republican victory, and Congress blocked the U.S. from joining the League of Nations. So it was left to Britain and France to create the New World Order. To regulate their New World Order in 1920, a new supra-empire was created, the League of Nations. The League would use its supra-governmental authorities to outlaw war, impose peace, create new spheres of political and economic interest, recolonize the Middle East by inventing new nations that never existed, and by jingo and by gum, they floated slogans such as self-determination. But they ensured that the men in the back room, and by that I mean British Petroleum, America's Standard Oil, and French Total, could draw all national borders in a fashion that would ensure the oil was pumped, the pipelines were laid, and the bank accounts were bloated. But that didn't quite work out as expected. The Arabs got off their camels and got into automobiles and hopped on trains. Their created kingdoms created just more strife and war. The Germans defaulted on 100,000 telephone poles to pay their war debt to the French, and the French reinvaded Western Germany, largely using African colonial troops, and modern hyperinflation was born as German money was printed faster than people could move it across the room in wheelbarrows. And ultimately, by 1926, it took 1 trillion Reichsmarks to buy a single US dollar. Wall Street could not allow the German Weimar to fail, so they floated all sorts of profitable loans to prop up the German government. The Weimar Republic and German society quickly collapsed. Hitler and Nazism arose, threatening world peace and stability, and once again, Wall Street and the British banks could not allow Germany to fail. And IBM, GM, Ford, and the scientific supremacists at the great corporately endowed Carnegie Institution and the Rockefeller Foundation joined in to shape and support the Third Reich, the one you know today. And you know the rest, but you probably did not realize that from the moment the League of Nations came into existence until the radioactive dust from Hiroshima began to settle, the League of Nations was operating as a world body, international policeman, and enforcer of peace. The League was in charge of the world, but the League, corrupt, colonial, and criminally culpable from the moment the gentlemen in Paris in 1920 tipped their top hats until 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan. These men did nothing to stop the mass murder, the wars, the invasions, the massacres, Arab self-killing, the international campaign to target the Jews, to pauperize the Jews, ghettoize the Jews, transport them to death camps, operate 35,000 concentration camps and subcamps, sell their gold teeth to banks in Geneva, Switzerland, where the League was headquartered. Nothing to stop France's massacre of Arabs in Syria in 1920, the Tulsa Race Massacre, the rise of Hitler in 1933, Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, the rape of Nanking in 1937, the 1939 Nazi Blitzkrieg, the 1941 Baghdad Farhud massacre, the trains continuously crisscrossing Europe with cattle cars, inside of which there were no cattle, the Russian rape of millions of German girls and women, the Catholic Church creating expressways for escape for major Nazi war criminals. So now the much newer world order would give rise to the need for a revamped international organization. The League of Nations in 1945 transitioned into the United Nations, named for the allied countries that arose to defeat civilization's most heinous regime, the Third Reich. All countries would have an equal vote, but the permanent five, would have a vote that was slightly more equal. The P5 made up the Security Council, and this new Capit de Tutti Kappa would be comprised of the 5 dominant military nations. The US and the UK, both allies, agreed. France, which was never an American ally in World War II. Get this through your head. France, I may be the first one to say it, France was never our ally. Bifurcated France was Hitler's ally through fascist Vichy's in the South government and the willing occupied North. We allied with the FFF, with the Free French Forces, with de Gaulle. So we have the US, the UK, the revised post-Nazi French, the murderous Stalin regime, which was well on its way to murdering 20 million East Europeans by imposing famine, mass executions, forced labor death, unsurvivable resettlement, and other ghastly means, but nonetheless a partner in the defeat of Germany, plus Civil War-torn China, which had already seen the cruel death of perhaps 5 million of its citizens. They added in the other European nations, African, Arab, and Latin American dictatorships as a general assembly to laud and applaud. Lo and behold, the monsters of mankind got a new Mercedes, a new skyscraper on the East River, a new logo, a new advertising campaign, and now they had more muscle than ever. This time the United States was its backbone. Make no mistake, it was the exact same group. The League of Nations simply imported its worthless self into something much bigger, much more grandiose, but equally worthless to the cause of world peace. So therefore, you could say hello to the Cold War of surrogate revolutionaries and combat, plus a nuclear arms race, the Cambodian genocide, about 3 million skulls scattered across the country, the open and highly publicized expulsion of 850,000 Jews from Arab lands, a sequence of Arab-Israeli wars enhanced by Nazi officers who had escaped thanks to the Catholic Church and the banking rat lines. The UN actually refused to deploy a disengagement force in Sinai to achieve peace between Israel and Egypt, and in their absence, the US State Department created an army of volunteer observers, the so-called multinational force and observers, where fat guys left their desk jobs to keep the peace that the UN refused to keep. And by the way, I was one of the first to actually visit the MFO in the Sinai. There's more. Taiwan was expelled and its seat was taken by the communist Chinese. The years-long Christian genocide in Nigeria unfolded. The Iran nuclear deal guaranteed Tehran a nuclear bomb in 2025 in exchange for a bunch of Airbus orders. This with the help of chief American Israel hater Barack Obama. The Uyghur genocide in China, which sits on the Security Council. Then we see the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which also sits on the UN Security Council. Let us not forget that Israel is the #1 enemy of the UN. Israel is villainized daily by the permanent and dominant agendas of the UN. Scores of condemning resolutions, more than the whole of the villainous world combined. The UN declared Zionism was racism until pressure forced it into a repeal. I can't leave out the wonderful UN Human Rights Council, whose members include, sit down please, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. Iran is a proud participant as well. And then the UN Terror Facilitation Bureau created the Hamas UNRWA access to launch October 7th. Since the UN came into existence, humanity has witnessed 300 bloody wars and massacres. The monsters are spinning the globe with their bloody fingerprints visible every time they touch the surface. Meanwhile, we see real peace breaking out. It's frustratingly slow, but it is happening. The Abraham Accords, another India-Pakistan war, this one with nuclear potential averted, the destruction of most of ISIS in the Middle East, Iran's nuclear program obliterated in the 12-day war, and any minute its regime will probably be expunged from the surface of the planet, the fractious and halting Gaza disengagement and return of all of its hostages. It's Trump, egotistical, imperial, flabbergasting, and flamboyant, but Trump and his Board of Peace, which many say is now threatening to overtake and supplant the worthless United Nations. Long overdue, I say. The UN General Secretary just recently said the UN is on the verge of financial collapse. The Pope says the Church, which was so helpful to Mussolini, Hitler, the Croatian Ustashi murderers, the mafia, the victimization of young boys by their priests, the escape of Nazis through church rat lines. The Catholic Church prefers not to join so as not to compete with the United Nations. But everyone can sense the UN is getting ready to be superseded by a true body of non-war, the Board of Peace. Don't judge the Board of Peace by all its current glitter and goofy starts. Judge it by its actions. The League had panache and did nothing. The UN has even more panache and does even more of nothing for peace. We have no idea, zero idea of how this new international organization will organize, evolve, and triumph. That will emerge in the months to come, and then during the next Republican presidency, that of Marco Rubio. You heard me, Marco Rubio. Some of you may remember that I single-handedly tried to create a worthy successor organization devoted to international peace to replace the UN, the Covenant of Democratic Nations. It failed because it attracted so much support that I, as one person alone, could not respond to all the people from across the world who wanted to create chapters and bring it into existence. But I bequeath my efforts to the Board of Peace or any group that wishes to dethrone the United Nations from its undeserved pinnacle of fraudulent peacemaking. For time, I left out 99% of everything, as you know, but I eagerly turned the mic over to two other expert voices. I give you foreign policy guru, an informed and measured mind on these issues. I give you Shoshana Bryen of the Jewish Policy Center. Take the screen. Shoshana, tell us what you know.
Thank you, Edwin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me. The whole thing is built, everything you said is right, okay? But it's all built on the wrong premise. The premise is that it was built for peace. Nothing built for peace, nothing organized for peace succeeds in a world where people want to fight. The best peace organizations are war organizations. They defeat bad guys, they protect good guys. The very best peace organization was the Allied Army in World War II that defeated Germany. It forced them to surrender. It tried people. It hanged people. It rewrote their constitution. It rewrote their laws. It couldn't kill Nazism. Nothing kills an ideology. This is true. But it made it socially unacceptable. And for the Japanese, they did the same thing. They dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They forced a surrender. All the places you talked about are places where there never was a victor and a loser that was understood as victors and losers. Peace is, as somebody said once, the condition imposed by the winner on the loser of the last war. If you say we need a ceasefire, if you say we need a reorganization, we need a restructure, you will never have peace. You'll have the interregnum before the next war. And that's what the UN is built on, and that's why it doesn't work. It has no army. It has no willingness to fight. Everybody's good. Never mind. Just stop fighting. Never works.
Shoshana, I really appreciate your insight there. You hit the nail on the head. The peace that we have seen, whether it started in ancient Nineveh or whether it ended with ISIS across the river from Donald Trump's bombing, that has always been imposed by victors. The League of Nations did not defeat Nazism. It was an alliance with good guys and bad guys, but it was an alliance. And so fundamentally, it's not possible to have an organization create an entity of peace without enforcement. And as you say, the UN has no army. And even if it wanted to deploy one, there are five guys sitting on the permanent five. The UN was built to fail. It was built to integrate the failed League of Nations, but it was built to fail as instrument of peace because it was filled with the warmongers, with the Chinese, with the Soviet Union. It was filled with the monsters of World War II. Let me ask you, Sho, is there any way the United Nations could be reformed?
No, because the United Nations, it's not only that they are the warmongers, it's they refuse to see that there are losers. You have to accept that you lose every once in a while. Israel has won all of its wars. It has never been allowed to call the other guys the losers. They always stop and they always say, okay, now we'll talk. Now you need losers. Germany accepted its loser status in 1945. So did Japan. That's how you create new societies that work better. They're not perfect. They're never perfect. But if you don't understand, someone has to lose. In Gaza, they're not calling Hamas losers. The president says, and I do hope the Board of Peace succeeds, the president is not saying that Hamas has to surrender. It says they have to have a ceasefire and they have to disarm themselves and they have to behave themselves. No, they have to admit that they lost. And from that comes peace. Until you have, and that's why the UN will never succeed. Nobody is a loser for the UN. We're all fine. Just stop shooting somebody. You're fine. Iran is fine. Iran is, what do they call that thing? It's on this special board for the whatever. They just elected it. Iran. Okay, it killed 30,000 people, maybe 40,000. Special Committee on the Charter of the United Nations just elected Iran. Dead people all over Iran. They won't call them losers. They won't say you lost. They won't say you're bad.
And they just killed about 30,000. The numbers will become more evident in the future. About 30,000, give or take, of their own people. For heaven's sakes, Sho, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations is populated with Afghanistan, which has now ruled that women must not only be covered head to toe, they may not be heard, they may not speak. So thank you very much, Sho. You have done a great job of explaining just how bad the world is and just how absent we have had a civilization of losers, where Japan had to sign the document of total and unconditional surrender, where Germany had to sign the document of total and unconditional surrender, and then you impose conditions of peace. And now...
And how did that work out for them? Worked out pretty good.
It worked out great for Japan and Germany.
Yes.
They were able to put aside their warlike manner and rule the world economically. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will turn to our country's #1 international jurist and international human rights litigator, now heading up the International Legal and Security Action Council, ILSAC, a man who has laid his eye on the misdeeds of the UN for quite a while. I give you my friend, Richard Heideman. Richard, the screen is yours.
Edwin, thank you very much. Shoshana, thank you for the great and brilliant work you've done all these years. And as you evidenced here today, your knowledge and commitment is extraordinary, and we all appreciate it. Let's go back, if we can, just barely 52 years. On May 10, 1974, the Soviet ambassador to the United Nations, Yakov Malik, addressing the UN Security Council, said, and I quote, "The Israeli aggressors have expelled hundreds of thousands of Arabs from their homes and are continuing their policy of annexation," end quote. But then he continued, "The aim of this policy is clear: to drive the Arab inhabitants from their land, to wipe out their existence. It bears all the marks of a policy of genocide, end quote. This quote was sent to me by my friend Raphael Madoff, who's a great historian and who I follow all the time. Madoff made the point, nobody was driven out, no territory was annexed, no mass expulsion took place, nobody was wiped out, there was no genocide. He concluded in his point that he shared, the Palestinian Arab population in the Israeli-administered territories has grown from approximately 1.2 million in that 1974 era, 50 years ago, to 4.8 million people today. Some genocide. Now, Edwin, you've launched this important Stop Genocide initiative. Let's take a look at what's really built into it. It's what I would call a use of nomenclature to attack and malign and distort history, the truthful history, and the historical rights of Israel and the Jewish people. Let's go back further. At the United Nations, formed, as you said, after World War II, the Arab League we know convened, countries convened, the UN was formed, Israel was created, and immediately the countries attacked. And the UN didn't stand up for Israel. The UN opposed Israel. The continuation of the British mandatory power right up to the eve of Israel's declaration of independence kept the Jews in its place. And that has been a policy forever. Deny the historical rights of the Jews. At the United Nations, you know, every country in the world is entitled to sit on the Security Council, except one, Israel. Why? Because you have to be in a regional grouping. Israel belongs in the Arab group, and they won't have her. I remember when I was president of B'nai B'rith International taking on this fight to get Israel admitted into a regional grouping. The regional grouping that would accept her under conditions was Western European and Others Group, also called WEOG. They accepted her under provisional conditions. One of those conditions is that because Israel is not in her rightful regional grouping, she can't sit on the Security Council. But every other nation in the world can sit on the Security Council. You talked about one country, one vote, Edwin. The countries of the world conduct themselves, when it comes to Israel, as business as usual. It's always, let's stand against Israel. And that has been the policy. I want to expand upon it if I can. In every country in the world, people are presumably free to emigrate, free to relocate, free to travel, free to do what their country permits them to do. When it comes to those who are Palestinian Arabs, they can't do so not because the Israelis won't let them out, but because the Arab countries overseeing the creation of the PA and the PLO itself won't let them out. They want to keep them there. Take a look at the lands. There's a big hubbub now about whether or not Jews can buy land in Judea and Samaria. Of course, we came from Judea and Samaria, so that land was ours. But today in the Palestinian Authority, the land is Judenrein. No Jews are permitted to own land. The United Nations itself supports all these discriminatory policies. Look at the creation of UNRWA, discriminatory against Israel and keeping Palestinians in their place. Yet UNRWA claims to have UN immunity, and in our court case, they're fighting the issue of immunity, which is now before the judge. At the Security Council, where Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar was just yesterday, the Security Council has convened on the issue of Israelis buying land in Judea and Samaria. And only the Israelis are criticized, only Jews are criticized for doing so. The institutional bureaucracy at the United Nations, which, as I already said, always follows the policy of business as usual, is rotten at its core. The truth of the matter is, I've always supported the continued existence of the United Nations, believing that if you're not at the party, you can't dance on the dance floor. And better to have a defective United Nations than have no family of nations gathering. Thank God that President Trump has taken it upon himself to float an idea and create a reality called the Board of Peace. And bringing Moldanov in to be its head is also a brilliant move. He's respected around the world. He's going to be the equivalent of the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I want to close by telling you a short story. So we have this Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations. When I was battling Israel's right to go into WEOG, there were two countries that were standing against it. Spain, and I met with the Spanish foreign minister, and we worked out their concerns. And who was the other country? It was Portugal. And who was the head? Antonio Guterres. And Antonio Guterres said to me, okay, we won't vote against it, but we have to wait until next session of the UN to do so. And I said, why, sir? And he said, because we're not going to do it now. Well, the next session was going to be headed by France, putting Israel's trust in France, that it would be admitted into WEOG under France, was a non-starter. With pressure, Guterres agreed to support, and Israel was admitted during the session. But it took maneuvering that was unconscionable. The UN is a cesspool. They love to hate Israel. They love to promote the hatred of Israel. And the fact that the president has created the Board of Peace is creating a leverage. I don't think it'll create accountability for the United Nations, but as they begin to run out of money, and this division and this committee and this staff can't get their paychecks, and when the United Nations needs U.S. money more than it needs its own ego, the United Nations will perhaps become more accountable. The Board of Peace, however, which convened just today, is going to do the real work needed in Gaza, needed in the region, and thank God it's been created.
Richard, that was stunning. Your comments will become a permanent part of history. I want to make a couple of distinctions, and I want to ask you a question. First, I want our people to know what Richard knows and what I know and what Shoshana knows, and that is that the United Nations did not create Israel. They voted for partition, which meant there was a General Assembly suggestion that Britain should get out, and the creation of Israel was self-declared, but it was recognized. That's how nations are created and recognized. They declare themselves, and then they're recognized, whether it's Israel, Somaliland, or any other place. What Richard said makes me ask the perpetual question, why the hell are there refugee camps today? They have their own quasi-states. They were running Gaza. There were refugee camps in Ramallah, in Area A, under the Palestinian Authority. These are deliberate conclaves of suffering that they create to inflict upon the people and the world. And the third thing I wanted to say, and I might be the first, and I invite Richard to steal this, coined the word the UNRWA-Hamas axis. And this causes me to ask Richard a question. What is happening with the lawsuit against UNRWA and the United Nations with regard to October 7th?
First, I'll address the issue of the refugee camps. To understand the policy of refugees, one has to look at international humanitarian law, at applicable U.S. law, and at the UN's own creation of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. The policies followed by the High Commissioner for Refugees are that all refugees everywhere in the world get resettled. Their families move, they get stipends, they get assistance, they get passports and citizenships, and they're into new places rather than war-torn or other places. The exception to that are the Palestinian Arabs, who fall not under UN High Commissioner of Refugees, but rather fall under the UN-created, I'll call it a group, called UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency. UNRWA adopted a different policy. It's not a policy of resettling, move them out, give them wholesome lives, feed the kids, clothe the kids, educate the kids, and hope for a better world. Instead, they've kept everybody in demonstration camps to demonstrate the ills of Israel as an apartheid, racist, criminal state. Those camps not only existed in Gaza and in the west bank of the Jordan River, in Judea and Samaria, and in the Palestinian territories, but also in Lebanon, also in Syria. Those camps have been maintained under UNRWA. Now, UNRWA head counts, because that's the way they grow their budget. For UN High Commissioner of Refugees, they only have refugees who have been forced out or moved out and need assistance, and their numbers are small and their staffs are small. With UNRWA, they took the hundreds of thousands of people who left or were forced out after 1948-49. Some say it's as many as 1.2 million. Many have died, so let's say there's up to 200,000 alive. Those should be classified as refugees. Those grandparents should have long ago been resettled. Instead, under UNRWA head counting, they have taken each ancestor of each grandparent and included them. So now they're servicing 5.2 million people. They can only identify about 2.5 million of them. Where does the other money go? The stipends go for all of these people. UNRWA has 30,000 employees. So they have an inertia, they have an institutional bureaucracy, they have power, they have control, they don't have accountability, and therefore they have maintained that to grow their own business. They claim to have immunity. The UN has immunity by virtue of U.S. treaties and statutory determinations and executive orders. But UNRWA is not mentioned there. In our litigation pending in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia against UNRWA and its U.S. charity called UNRWA USA, UNRWA filed a motion recently for the court to declare that it has immunity. There's a New York federal judge that has said UNRWA has immunity. We just filed our response. It's in the public record, or I wouldn't talk about it. And there's a dissection created by Joe Typograph of our firm of how it is that anybody at the UN gets immunity and UNRWA doesn't qualify. It's going to be up to the judge to determine it. I won't take you all the way through it. I will tell you the White House is interested, the State Department is interested, the Justice Department is interested. They're watching the litigation. They filed a statement of interest in the New York matter, and we'll wait and see what else develops in the litigation in federal court, still pending in D.C. against UNRWA. We'll keep you posted.
So let me ask you straight. Do you believe, knowing the UN as you do, that the UN can be supplanted by either the Board of Peace or something like the Board of Peace?
Yes.
So I want to know. Show.
Okay, I want to throw something in here. One of the reasons that UNRWA is what it is because nobody took the lesson of UNCRA. Do you know UNCRA? UNKRA. See, I don't think so, right?
Even I don't know UNCRA.
Well, you need to, because UNCRA is the United Nations Korea Relief Agency. After the Korean War, like UNRWA, UNCRA was created to settle refugees, and it did. And guess what? It went out of business after it settled about 2 million refugees in South Korea. At the time, UNRWA was just like UNCRA. It was a UN agency staffed by UN people, not by locals. The US decided that UNRWA, like UNCRA, needed to disappear, but it didn't want to disappear. And we made one of the biggest mistakes we ever made. We allowed the UN bureaucracy to turn it over to an Arab interstate bureaucracy. And so an Arab bureaucracy that consisted of entirely enemies of Israel took over UNRWA and became what everything Richard said. I mean, it's all what Richard said and probably worse than he's willing to say to us. But it's because the UN gave it to them. And instead of insisting on the international kind of body that UNCRA was and that UNRWA was in the beginning, including with some really great State Department people trying to resettle Arab refugees, we turned it over to all the enemies of Israel. And now you have the problem that you have. And now you see the real problem of the UN from the beginning. It has no backbone. And without a backbone, meh.
And you're right.
Edwin, I'd like to add a point on top of what Shoshana has brilliantly said. It relates to the PLO and the PA and the state of Palestine. It'll take 1 minute. Remember, the PLO is a designated foreign terror organization made up of all of these terror organizations as its members. Out of Oslo, there was created the PA, the Palestinian National Authority. It's a quasi-governmental entity. It doesn't control any of the embassies around the world that are Palestinian embassies, because the sole legitimate representative for negotiating and other purposes of the Palestinian people is the PLO, Yasser Arafat's PLO. So the PA is this entity created by agreement, and it has various obligations. It also has various rights. A right that it doesn't have, however, is to change its name. I understand that what Mahmoud Abbas did as the head of the PA and the head of the PLO is he signed an executive order changing the name of the Palestinian Authority to the State of Palestine. And then after that, the UN changed all the labels and all the signs to the State of Palestine. This is relevant again today because this week, the PA and the PLO have rolled out a Palestinian constitution that if you read it, you won't believe the rights that are built in, the 50 pages and the this and the provisions, etc., etc. In the name of the State of Palestine. The State of Palestine is the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is not a government and hasn't been recognized by anybody as a government. What's been recognized as the State of Palestine really is the Palestine Liberation Organization, that designated foreign terror organization, and that is what people in the streets are saying they prefer over the damn Jews. It's always our fault. And when you show up at an NBA night wearing Palestinian garb to show the world they're more important than Danny Avila, the first Jewish player, and say, I didn't know he was Jewish, I didn't know he was Israeli, where is truth? It is time that what we mandate is what the president is calling for, truth. So the creation of the Board of Peace can indeed replace the UN, because without money, the UN can't exist. And listen to this. If you can replace the East Wing of the White House with a grand, much-needed dining room, a ballroom. Phyllis and I have been fortunate enough to be there. If you can replace that, go back to New York City, look at the decrepit nature of the UN headquarters and that valuable real estate. It could be a symbol to the world of real peace, and it ought to be. And don't put it past the president to say before he's done, we're going to make the United Nations truly become again what it was intended to be, the family of nations committed to peace, and we have a new home for the Board of Peace. It's going to be on United Nations Plaza.
Well, for that, he would have to negate the headquarters agreement, and I hope that he would. This is a fascinating discussion. We're going to take a couple of questions here before we run out of time. So the first one is from the Villages. How did the Russian Federation assume the Security Council seat of the Soviet Union after its demise? Now, this here is an interesting question. I'm going to go to show first. But when they expelled Taiwan and placed Communist China in its place, that was by an agreement. That was by a UN agreement, probably an illegal one, probably contrived, but they did agree. But when the Soviet Union fell, Shoshana, what said that the Stalin entity, the Soviet Union, sitting on the Permanent Security Council, what said that that seat would automatically go to a brand new, smaller entity called the Russian Federation? Show, what do you know?
They looked at it like Republicans taking over from Democrats. Change of government, change of seat. The Taiwan-China thing was different because when the communists took over the mainland, the nationalists still had Taiwan. Taiwan was in the Security Council. The communists were not. You had to balance two existing entities. Russian Federation, Soviet Union. Soviet Union's dead. Russian Federation's what's left. It was easy. Didn't need to do anything about it. Nobody opposed it in the name of the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union wasn't there.
All right, that's an excellent explanation. The Villages, thank you. From the Watch Party in Newton, Mass, let's see here. From where does the UN actually derive its authority? I'll answer that first. It is self-proclaimed. There is no such thing as international law. There are international agreements that constitute something that uses the word law, and only the people, generally speaking, who agree to those agreements are bound by those agreements. So basically, the League of Nations has its own authority. The Arab League has its own authority. The United States has its own declared authority, and the Board of Peace can create its own authority. So the UN has authority by virtue of itself. Remember, William the Conqueror said, I am the king, and guess what? He was the king. Richard, what do you say?
I'm still thinking about the Russia-Soviet issue, because let's remember that it was in 73 after the war, in 74 when the Soviet ambassador made the comment I've already quoted, but then it was in 75 that the United Nations adopted Zionism racism. It was a Soviet propaganda campaign that has led to Israel being called this genocidal, apartheid, racist, criminal state. And it has continued all these years, right up to recently. Remember that it was Russia that began to use the term Nazis in talking about Ukraine, and the world let it go on. The fact that we've all forgotten history that occurred just either in our lifetime or shortly before, of the decimation of the Jewish people in the Shoah, is beyond comprehension. Beyond comprehension, the distortion that is going on, the denial that is going on, not just the denial of the truth, but the denial of truthful Holocaust history, is beyond comprehension. None of us have talked about the massive anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, Holocaust denial and distortion that is going on, that we are facing today. This didn't come upon us overnight. It has been building, and our weakness has permitted it to build because we are always pacifists, and we say we will find a better way. We will contribute in a better way. I didn't answer your question, but I hope it's a better contribution.
I think it's a better response than the question that I asked, because you got me thinking too that basically this whole negative acidic thing arises from a non-member of the Soviet Union. I would just like to reply to you rhetorically that World War I was fought because of slogans. Slogans, jingos was the word that they used. No one could explain why. And now we continue to fight for our survival because of slogans. Last question. All right, this is from the Watch Party in Chicago. Do you really think that Marco Rubio has a chance in 2028? Richard, you can pass or answer.
Yes.
Shoshana, pass or answer?
Yes.
Edwin, yes. Okay, JD, I hope you heard that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Hold for my closing word of wisdom, just 2 minutes away. But first, I want to thank my brilliant guests, Shoshana, Bryen, and Richard Heideman. Plus, I thank my talented international team, including Richard in the Philippines, who makes those fabulous trailers, Lance in Michigan, Wes in San Francisco, Christine in Indiana, as well as many others in numerous additional cities across the world. I'll see everyone back here in 3 weeks, not 2, because of Pesach coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, iTunes Books, Google Books, Kobo, or Audible.com platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 325 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, and my latest, Israel Strikes Iran. That's going to be updated. You want an autographed copy? Hit edwinblack.com and click books. Get access to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show, and click that notification button like tens of thousands of others have. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on X as well as Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom. Yes, we stand alone, so we must all stand tall. I'm zooming out from our nation's capital. Bless all of you. Pray for all that is unfolding before our very eyes.